Hello, my name is Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and today I'm going to be discussing our presidents and some infamous immigration laws and restrictions which they've been associated with. Of course, this is particularly interesting to me considering the times. Everybody knows of the notorious, infamous ICE raids, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement raids going on under number 45 and 47, President Donald Trump. But he didn't set the precedent. He already had a precedent for him through practices by by earlier presidents, even including a founding president, a founding father who was president, President John Adams. Again, I said this is important for me because, yeah, today I'm an American citizen. I've been an American citizen for a while. But of course, I went through the immigration process. And so, uh, I didn't, there was no hitch in in my procedure. In fact, considering the way I went through the immigration process, um, I, I used to like believe that, my God, um, U.S. government officials are the most efficient, at least immigration. I think USCIS, it used to be Immigration and Naturalization Service when I came in. I the first president I actually lived in the U.S. under was actually Bill Clinton. So I was in America legally, and I've always had legal status. Not everybody's fortunate, but I've been very fortunate. So of course, my point being that I used to praise the U.S. federal government that it was so efficient, considering my immigration experience up until the time I became an American citizen. There was no snag whatsoever, and they were just so efficient, effective, very professional, very courteous. I never had a problem. Of course, I've been doing videos and I've been talking about my experience because I work for the U.S. government, right? I became a United States civil. After I became a citizen, I joined the Federal Civil Service, and of course, I've been specifically the Department of Defense, and I've been doing videos talking about my wrongful detention and the swatting, which was instigated by people that I reported for fraud in the DoD, which is this is a rare instance. I'm not going to get into that. I've done several videos detailing these events, and of course, in the process, my when I was swatted and wrongfully removed from my home by a SWAT team and law enforcement who didn't have an arrest warrant. It was again I was a victim of a swatting. They proceeded to they stole my immigration and my naturalization certificate of naturalization. Yeah, that's what it's called, certificate of naturalization as a U.S. citizen, which is a felony offense, right? Nobody's supposed to touch that document because that document's my property, belongs to me. No one's supposed to steal it. It's actually there's a law. It's a felony offense to take it. The police have no jurisdiction over it. Not my. Nobody has jurisdiction over that. Um, and my US passport ID as well was stolen. My social security card was stolen. So basically, these rogue law enforcement who came to raid me based on a swatting, um, you know, stole my identity. Money was also withdrawn from my bank account, apart from cash that was stolen from my house. I had cash in my apartment, my credit cards, all these things, my wristwatches, you know, my luxury items, they were stolen, and things that weren't stolen were destroyed. And this was was stolen by law enforcement. One of them was police officer Demarcus Coleman and Sergeant Jeffrey Ray. He's the one who shot me in the head. And of course, they filed falsified police reports. But what I want to talk about today is immigration and what our presidents have done, to advance it or to impede uh, immigration. Um, so it's kind of interesting. I've said this before when I was talking about the Declaration of Independence. Our founding fathers at the beginning, one of the grievances that Thomas Jefferson even actually raised was that the King of England, George II, had prevented laws for the naturalization of foreigners, and he was preventing was refusing to pass laws that would encourage the migrations hither. He used the term migrations hither, which means immigration, right? It was preventing immigration. So you could see at the founding, our founding fathers wanted immigration. They welcomed immigration, naturalization of citizens. One of such founding father who was actually naturalized, everybody knows Alexander Hamilton. He wasn't born in America, and he became our first Secretary of the Treasury, and he was the most powerful man in George Washington's cabinet, and also the architect of the American system. The American system is the system of government that the Federalist Party advocated, and of course, it was a pattern, the architecture that the government followed for a long time. So, in the beginning, in the Declaration of Independence, uh, Thomas Jefferson and the rest of our founding fathers, one of the grievances they raised was that the king was preventing the naturalization of foreigners. So our founding fathers wanted immigration. Now, after that, though, after our independence, our second president was the first president whose administration passed an infamous immigration policy, and that was John Adams with the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, when America was engaged in the quasi war with France. Now, the reason why he also did this was it was sort of to suppress. It was a political move by the Adams administration against the Democratic Republican Party um, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So the early immigrants favored the Democratic Republican Party of Thomas Jefferson, because the early immigrants at that time were were the French due to the French Revolution. So, and Philadelphia was their base. So the early immigrants favored the Democratic Republican Party, and Thomas Jefferson, liked the French. He was in love with the French, and of course, because we'd gone to war with England. Of course, the American nationalism sort of uh, sort of had caused our politicians at the time to at least make a pretense of a cold shoulder, and just stand off, you know set England aside, but on the other hand, Thomas Jefferson favored the French, and they were migrating and coming in to the U.S. During that time. Especially, they were going to Philadelphia. The French Huguenots, a lot of them moved to Philadelphia, and as I said, immigrants found a home in the Democratic Republican Party. Now, particularly a Democratic Republican immigrants that John Adams' law targeted was also a journalist by the name of James Callender. James Callender was actually he was a Scottish immigrant, and he was a fugitive from the law in England. So I guess that was the reason why uh, John Adams didn't have him deported. Instead, he was imprisoned. So he was a pamphleteer, that's a journalist, and he would ridicule and criticize John Adams. And so, what the Alien and Sedition Act was, it made it illegal to criticize the government. They could imprison you for that. So it was an affront to freedom of speech. That's one. And the other thing is, it allowed the president to deport or imprison any non-citizen he considered dangerous. Right. So, in response, of course, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson passed the infamous Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, and those were the laws that sort of were catalysts to later claims by the Southerners, slaveholding Southerners like John Calhoun, that and the Nullifier Party, saying that uh, uh, a state could actually nullify a law it believed was unconstitutional, that they could nullify a law by the federal government if they believed it was unconstitutional. So that was the Alien and Sedition Act by John Adams. Now, after that, another president who made uh, a a you know another infamous immigration law was Chester A. Arthur. Of course, I've talked about Chester A. Arthur, who did a great thing by reforming our civil service with the Pendleton Act, but he also did something infamous by uh, passing um, the first xenophobic, outwardly racist immigration law that targeted, that specifically excluded an ethnic group or a race of people, an ethnic group. That's the that's the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which specifically excluded immigration of Chinese laborers for 10 years. Initially, they were going to try and make it 20 years, but it was set at 10 years. So that was the immigration and sorry, that was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. So what it did was it barred Chinese laborers from immigrating or coming to the U.S. for 10 years, and of course it had its side effects, which it separated Chinese families and other fallout. However, this was made permanent later on by President Woodrow Wilson, who is also rather infamous for having made he segregated the federal civil service, and he filmed he had the Birth of a Nation, the racist film glorifying the KKK. He had it filmed in the White House, so he's also notorious for that. That's President Woodrow Wilson, our 20th president. So he passed the immigration um, Immigration Act of 1917, and it was during the First World War. And what it did was it created what's called the Asiatic Barred Zone, so excluding most Asians from coming to America, and it also established some literacy tests for immigration, raised taxes for immigration, and and it made permanent the bar on Chinese laborers, via the initial Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Um, Now, this was reinforced in 1924 under President Calvin Coolidge, who did another Immigration Act of 1924. They also have some other names associated with them, but the name of the congressman who authored the bill, right? So, but they're they're known, by the moniker Immigration Act of 1917 or Immigration Act of 1924. So the Immigration Act of 1924 now barred all Asians, right? And it now it codified them as being perpetual foreigners. They're perpetual foreigners ineligible for citizenship, right? That's all Asians under President Calvin Coolidge in 1924. So yeah, those were really terrible and racist laws. So the objective was to limit the growth of the growth or even ability to sustain Asian communities in America. So those were those negative laws. However, in comes President Lyndon B. Johnson, the civil rights champion, who passed the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which changed things and it removed the national origin quotas. So one of the other features of the uh, Immigration Act of 1924 under President Coolidge was that it created national origin quotas. It established national origin quotas and it favored immigration from Northern and Western Europe. It's limited immigration from Southern Europe. That's from Italians. It discriminated against Jewish people, and also, and of course, it outright banned Asians. Asians could not immigrate. It was codified that they were perpetual foreigners and they were ineligible for citizenship. But with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, one of the civil rights laws under President Lyndon B. Johnson, it removed all those national origin quotas. It removed all those racist quotas, and it made immigration more democratic and to reflect America's democratic ideals of equality and fairness. So that's why everybody was able, now we have Asian Americans who've been able to grow, especially since those immigration reforms under President Lyndon B. Johnson. That's people like me. Well, those, because I'm African. Once the 14th Amendment protects, is supposed to protect everybody, but since Congress was passing laws that were specifically excluding Asians and certain people, so that's what the immigration laws of 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was doing. It was barring Chinese. The 1970 barred Asians. 1924 it said Asians were ineligible permanently ineligible for citizenship. That was the 1924 Act, and so even if they those were laws that were eventually deemed unconstitutional, right? And fortunately, with the Congress can change anything. By the way, when Congress can make a law to change the Constitution. So even though there's the 14th Amendment, right, that says if you're born, you're a naturalized citizen. But in terms of the executive still has control, and Congress still has control ability to regulate, despite the 14th Amendment being there. Congress has the ability to regulate who can enter the United States legally. And so this is what those, despite the 14th Amendment saying anybody born here is a natural born citizen, but Congress Congress and the president can still say, well, they're going to restrict who comes here. They can establish a law and they're going to restrict who gets to immigrate, who gets to come to America. And that was what they were doing with the outright xenophobic laws, and racist laws. But again, with the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act of President Lyndon B. Johnson, it changed things significantly and it made immigration more liberal and more, created more opportunities. It was more, it was more, it reflected, America's democratic ideals of fairness and equality. Now, of course, they added some provisions as well, such as including a combination of skills, that immigrants should bring certain skills, and people who had, immigrants who had family relatives here who in America who were citizens or permanent residents were also favored because those initial outright xenophobic immigration laws, they were separating families. So with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, it had the corrective remedial action of reuniting families. So, but after that, though, we see more recently there have been more, because that there was an unanticipated consequence, right? The demographic and ethnic composition of America changed substantially. By the time I came to the US and I was doing my MBA in an organizational behavior and international management course I took, I remember they anticipated that at a certain time, maybe in 50 years, minorities would be the majority. I guess that's a composite. The aggregate of minorities would be the majority population, you know. Um, of course, currently it's whites that are the majority, but I think it's shifted to about maybe 60%, 55%. So that's for the white population. And so the minority groups as a whole, they keep increasing. And so you can see the backlash, so there's some kind of blowback from that. And, you know, consequently, the more draconian immigration laws and ICE raids that are going on under President Trump. What did President Trump do? President Trump, of course, he implemented a zero tolerance act and the Laken Riley Act, which allowed mandatory detention and deportation for illegal immigrants charged with certain crimes, not even convicted if they're charged. Because under our laws, if you're charged with a crime, you're still innocent until proven guilty. You could be acquitted, and especially since we know we have rogue cops who they charge people wrongfully with crimes they haven't committed just because some cops might be racist, just like my experience, right? I've been charged with um, crimes that I haven't committed, right? The police officer who came without a arrest warrant shot me in my head, robbed me, assaulted me. I didn't touch them. They were 40, not one. They said I assaulted them, right? And the body camera evidence shows I didn't assault anybody. So they're probably delusional or they're outright liars. Of course, they are liars and they might be delusional and need need medication as well. Um, in any event, they shouldn't be cops. But it turns out that the police officers, because they were focusing on the police officer who said I assaulted him, they're focusing on his body cam. Turns out he's the one who shot me in the head, and he's like about 20 feet away, and I'm backing him. He shot me in the head. So, and you can see he falsified his police report, which is a crime. And then they went on to steal my certificate of naturalization, stole my wristwatches, stole my property, and they denied taking them. We've asked for, they've destroyed certain body cam evidence, so it's astonishing. And so being charged with a crime, it's unfortunate that, today non-citizens can be charged with a crime and just suddenly be deported. Of course, that's the Abrego Garcia issue that's gone on, and it's caused national and international attention because this guy was just charged with a crime. He said they're false charges. He's not been convicted. So that's the Laken Riley Act under President Trump. President Joe Biden himself also uh, he wasn't so much pro-immigration. He did, implement some draconian policies as well. For instance, he restricted, asylum rights by, through a June 2024 policy that suspended um, it suspended asylum applications at the southern border. Uh, you know, and prior to him, also even President Barack Obama himself, his opponents have called him deporter in chief because he apparently he's deported the most people. He deported 2 million people in 5 years. He had 2 million people deported. That's a lot. So his critics call him deporter in chief. That's President Barack Obama. Surprisingly, though, President George W. Bush, number 43, uh, seems to have been more lenient regarding with immigration, and was working towards, path towards, you know, pathways for regularization uh, of immigrants, and permanent residency and citizenship, but which all presidents sort of worked towards. President Obama as well wanted that, and I guess that was the reason why he had to show a certain level of toughness so that just to move the needle towards creating a legal pathway towards naturalization. But and you know prior to George Bush, President Bill Clinton in 1996 did pass the um, he passed the illegal immigration reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, which expanded the categories of uh, the categories of offenses for which illegal immigrants could be detained and deported. And of course, so we see President Donald Trump has had precedents for his deportation and detention. Of course, these the concern is that these violate habeas corpus, right? Because people have been detained, uh, you know, for long periods, people being deported. It violates the Fifth Amendment due process of law rights. And again, of course, someone like me, I hate to see things like this since I didn't have any snag whatsoever regarding my immigration process. So I'm an American citizen. I don't regret it one bit. It's been amazing. Now I've lived most of my life in America, um, and of course, despite what I'm going through now, I really don't regret it. Of course, I like to work and I like to be busy. So, and of course, fortunately for me, I do have a law degree. So it's something that, and I write. So this is something that my current experiences, they inspire me to be able to see where I can work as an advocate to help others because I was very lucky with my immigration process. I'm astonished at what's going on right now. It's unbelievable. But people who want to immigrate, they shouldn't be discouraged by what's going on. I think those who are it's now called USCIS, it used to be called Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS. I think those people know what they're doing. And I think if you can keep um, you know, remain legal. That's very, very important. Remain legal and honest in the uh, immigration process. I think America is still the most welcoming nation in the world. I was an international student when I first came, lawful international student F1. So I'm kind of like dismayed by the fact that President Trump banned Nigeria, temporarily from F1 and immigration. Of course, he said, because of what's going on. Of course, there were the strikes on Christmas Day against terrorists in Nigeria, which Donald Trump launched. And so I guess he does have a responsibility to keep Americans safe. But to be honest, I do videos and I'm able to criticize America because that's one of the benefits of being an American, of even just living here. Once you come here, even before becoming an American, you're free. You have the benefits of the Bill of Rights, right? You have freedom of speech, and it's still the freest nation for an immigrant or for a foreigner in the world. It has an open border policy. Of course, it means that open border policy, that welcoming attitude that people can come and, just operate and do, live their lives uh, and enjoy their liberties, their freedoms. Of course, it leaves them sometimes vulnerable uh, to bad actors, people, bad actors who have malevolent intentions. Of course, I was in America when uh, 9/11 happened. I was a student in Alabama. I remember, I was at work and I when it happened. In the South, somebody I was working with was just, he saw it. He was like, "The United States is now at war," and I remember I was just, and they started talking about the people that were, that committed the atrocity, right? That they were had been F1 students, and here I was like, my God, and okay, are these guys going to be xenophobic towards me? Are they going to round me up? Are they going to, what are they? Because here I was a black guy, an African, and I was in a predominantly white town in Troy, Alabama. I was in predominantly white school, and you know, I was fine. So America is a very welcoming, hospitable society, to be honest. Um, I don't know anywhere else in the world apart from my own country that I came from originally, Nigeria. I don't know anywhere else in the world that I could have just gone and be free. And I've traveled, right? I've traveled, but other places, they do have their restrictions. And I didn't come here with my family. I didn't come here with my siblings or my parents. I came here alone. And America let me do what it was I came to do, right? I came to get an education. I got more education, than I planned for, more education than my parents planned for me to have, right? I got my Ivy League degree, my MBA, my Doctor of Law degree. I went to Europe and schooled further. Went to the best universities in Europe, and I'm an American citizen. And then I got the icing on top with getting to work in the Department of Defense. So it is a hospitable, welcoming nation. We get those, if you study history like I do, American history like I do, you see we go back and forth with immigration and certain things. With race, we go back and forth, right? So America's just reacting to certain things, right? And it readjusts. um the there are things, you know there are things going on with regard to immigration, and so it's that reaction America is having. And as I gave that inventory of actions by presidents, you see the back and forth. You see the beginning of America when America was going to war with England. One of the top items on America's agenda in the Declaration of Independence was immigration. Was saying, hey, they were looking for immigrants, and the king was preventing this. It was preventing the naturalization of foreigners. They were looking for immigrants, right? So it was top on the agenda. In fact, when you read the Declaration of Independence, you see it's one of the top points that Thomas Jefferson, you know, raises. It's not in the bottom, and it's not just one line. It's a whole paragraph, and he's citing stuff. So you see, immigration is very important to us. Of course, again, we go back and forth. You know, when it's the economy, when there's something wrong with the economy. Uh, there were some infamous rules that President Hoover passed. The remigration policies in the during the Great Depression under President Herbert Hoover, that in which he actually forced the voluntary deportation of Mexican citizens. So not just migrants, they were actually Mexican citizens, because he claimed that they were taking jobs. And if Mexican citizens just went back to Mexico, because America did take a lot of lands from Mexico. These people were born in America; they were actually American citizens, but the federal government got coerced the state governments to file false charges and make life unbearable for Mexicans, right? Mexican Americans. And so they couldn't work. So they would lock them up and they'd lose their jobs. They couldn't work, they couldn't live, and they prevented them from getting support, state support, and encouraged the states to actually buy them one-way tickets to go back to go to Mexico. They were from America, but they were saying, okay, go back to Mexico where they'd never been because they were born in America, so that they could just carry on with their lives. And you see these, so there are people that are racist, but we have laws, and you have to just be patient. Um, you know, Sit tight, and the law prevails. Um, it's kind of funny that what I'm experiencing, it's a county that filed false charges against me. Everything they've done is illegal, right? It's a county, and they've done it to try and it's a xenophobic act because it's a reaction regarding something at work. I reported some people for fraud, and it turns out, they're native born, right? They're white people. And of course, they have people in the police force, people in the courts. It turns out the people I reported are actually from the county, Montgomery County. They were born, they raised, they're from that place. So obviously, they have these white people, judges, illegal, judges doing illegal things on their behalf. So they raided me, did a swatting, and they stole my certificate of naturalization and things and filed false charges against me for almost 3 years, locked me up, detained me for about 15 months, placed me under house arrest for a year, offered me a false, a corrupted plea bargain, which I, of course, refused. That, okay, if you can commit prosecutorial, police, and judicial misconduct, I'm eager to have my day in court. I'm waiting for that. They even offered me that, okay, the state agencies offered me that if I go back to Nigeria and don't come back, they'll drop the charges. You filed false charges. I said, that's not going to happen. You're not the federal government. You're not immigration. I'm an American citizen. The fact that you've stolen my certificate of naturalization, it doesn't mean anything, right? This is a new era where we have computers. It's in the system, right? That I'm an American citizen. And I have my passport, right? That was something I was fortunate that I kept. They stole my certificate of naturalization. See, these are bird brains. Stole my certificate of naturalization. Only God knows what they've done with it. Of course, I've reported it to the FBI and the FTC that handles it, and so that's actually a felony. So you can see, there are people in the system. It's strange that I didn't experience this before I became an American citizen. I didn't experience any of these things, and it gave me an appreciation of what Black Americans and other marginalized groups, even Asian Americans, Chinese. You can imagine those born here, what they've had to do to assert their citizenship. I didn't know that I would, after I became a citizen, I would be forced to be asserting, going to courts to assert my citizenship and my rights. So, xenophobes, racists in the system have always been there. They've always had some kind of stranglehold, some kind of control, being able to abuse the apparatus of state. That's not new. And I guess, I now have to assert my rights as an American citizen, and fight for it to be respected using the tools I have. Fortunately, I have the appropriate tools, the education, the law, right? I'm legally trained. And so, this is, I know in the end, justice will prevail. In any event, this has gotten long. And yeah, so we've had the back and forth regarding immigration. And I just wanted to have a discussion on, the immigration laws we've had. And I guess, so whatever is going on right now regarding ICE raids and the current uh, attempts, anti-immigration sentiments of the current administration, America's going to get over it. We've been there before. At the beginning of our uh, republic, we've been there before. We were there in the 19th century. We were there in the 20th century, and then it always, America always fixes itself. We adjust. We just can't take our republic, our democracy for granted. Of course, nobody wants um, the borders to be abused. Excuse me. That's very important, but that's just something for our politicians, our lawmakers, to be able to show uh, the appropriate political will to pass the necessary immigration reforms and laws that can, yes, it allows a pathway towards citizenship, and it addresses our porous borders. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I've talked about the color of law violations that I've been suffering in Montgomery County, Maryland, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the courts, uh, and the violation of my constitutional rights by a corrupt, racist, and xenophobic judge in Montgomery County, Judge James Bonifant, and the police abuses and the abuses by the state attorney's office under a corrupt state attorney, John McCarthy. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.